Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, however this might find you, and welcome to Main Street, where we're riffing on Main Street. Today I got a great guest and someone who I have conversations with, but really am looking forward to this conversation. Why don't you tell people who you are and what you do without telling me your title?
So my name is Jacob Juncker, and broadly speaking, I would say that my role is as a community builder.
Okay.
Someone who is meant to call the community together to help support one another and be together.
And you do that in a lot of ways, don't you? Give me a sense.
Vocationally, I do that through discussion series and worship. In the community, I do that through bringing diverse religious backgrounds together for conversations about community topics, and in some instances, trying to find constructive ways to deal with whatever the topic might be.
Right. So what brought you to that work?
I'm trying really hard not to use titles, so this is
very
narrow.
Yeah, but what brought you to that? I like doing that because I like people to really dig a little deeper into who they are and what they do, and not hide behind a title. But go ahead.
Well, I didn't know how to answer that question without providing a title, so I think it's been an evolution for me as a clergy person to understand my role as that community builder kind of role, rather than, say, resident theologian or resident philosopher, whatever the case might be, administrator to the organization. So I have simply come to understand that community is everything. And it's the thing we all desperately long for, but don't always know how to engage in it. And we take all of those relationships and all the different communities we're part of for granted, and often don't even know how we got them to begin with. So we don't understand, or we take for granted our familial community and relationships, our religious community and relationships, all of them, work, et cetera, and don't tend to them quite as well as we should, and I include myself in that. And so it has just come over time as I've watched people in my vocational life interacting with the church, and even in trying to just be a better citizen in general. That community building has just kind of seeped in. It wasn't like an aha moment. But I have found myself, even in my now theological understanding, how I understand God, to find that communal stuff just rolling all in, and in a really profound way for me.
So you said an interesting thing, resident philosopher. Tell me a little bit more about that.
I love to think in the abstract. I'm part of a radio show here in Franklin, and I think you
can mention it.
So I'm part of a radio show called the Franklin Faith Forum. It includes myself, Rabbi Tom Alpert, and Reverend Doreen Otten, and we simply sit down and talk about different aspects of faith. I think all of them would say that I'm the thought person. Not that they're not thoughtful, but I'm the one that's kind of poking and prodding and asking the question, or kind of trying to come up with the topic. I love that reflective nature of philosophy. I would not call myself an academic philosopher by any stretch, but that ability to reflect and think deeply about relationships, about our latest couple of radio shows was about funerary rites and rituals. I think that deep thought is really, really important for much the same reasons that I said for relationships, right? We often come to our definitions of things because they've been given to us, and we don't really sit down and think, well, why do I think that? Why do I believe that? If we are reflective, I think we might find that our differences aren't quite as deep as we assume that they are.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, you did that interesting thing. You asked that question, right? And on some levels, that's practical philosophy, is to stop and that reflection is, well, why? Let's ask the question. I once heard Elie Wiesel say that the most beautiful word in the English language he thought was question, because it's about a quest, and it's about a journey, and it's about just sort of thinking how you got there, or how do you get there, if that's what it's about. I also love it because I think you demonstrate to people how, yeah, sure, we can all be philosophers day to day, and this is where there is some real good in the things of philosophy, reading and questioning and interacting and conversation and pitching it and everything else. Important.
The question is probably more important than the answer.
Boy, that is hard for people to swallow.
It is. Well, they have to be given the permission to ask the question.
Yes, that's right. Or be asked the question.
Or be asked the question,
right?
Exactly.
That's hard. That's really hard.
And I think that's where, for me, faith, and I'm not talking about any particular avenue, but I think that's where faith in general is a pretty important aspect of one's life, because it forces one into the unknown, which is the root of what a question is.
Correct. Well, you've put two things together there: the question, and also you mentioned that we take each other for granted, and we take our communities for granted. We take our relationships for granted, and so how do we push those two things together? That curiosity, those questions, and also the real appreciation that's necessary for us just being in spaces together.
I think something that we struggle with and would pull all of this together is learning just to interact with one another again. And we've
learning again, or just learning at all?
Maybe both. I mean, for sure, it has become so cliche, so I am hesitant to use this, but I mean, for sure, post-COVID, isolation, right? Yeah, so that's kind of, it was. I was looking at that, 3-4 years ago. Right. Oh my goodness. But for sure, there's some relearning that needs to occur. But now, because that's been so long, it is a complete new learning for a big group of people. I have 4 children in elementary school. In particular, my kindergarten never experienced that kind of whatever it was that existed before COVID. Right. And so it is both. We need to learn how to share space one another, say this somewhat jokingly, but share air with one another.
Right.
And also not just the sharing of space and air in real time, physical space where we can touch one another. But because we've lost that capacity, I think it's also impacted our capacity to interact with one another electronically as well. Because we can too readily, I think, separate the interaction where we can touch one another from the interaction that happens online. And if we knew that, and when I shoot that text or email, I'm going to run into Ken in an hour.
Right.
Oh, maybe I ought to not be such a jerk.
Yeah.
I'm going to look in the camera and not be such a jerk.
Well, so given that, where is the hope? If we can't get this right with each other and we know each other, how are we going to do it with strangers?
I think it's actually maybe easier with strangers because there's no implications if I get it wrong. Like if I'm only going to pass you by on the street, it's easy for me to be like, how's it going?
That's a good way to think about it.
I think it's much harder if now I got to see you.
Right.
Oh,
Right.
I'm gonna run into that person on my walk to work or on my ride on the train or and I think maybe we're more attuned to the consequences than we realize. Maybe that's why we so kind of close ourselves off.
There's that questioning and that philosophy again. And yet we still, I agree with you, I think it might be easier with strangers. And yet we have a really difficult time not only interacting with the stranger, but we have in our minds that we're at war with each other.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Where's the hope for this?
Well, I think the hope is trying to create some safe space.
What's that mean?
Well, there's no safe space in terms of threat of, any space where you interact with people, there's a possibility that harm could be done.
Sure.
Always. There's always something.
Sure.
But safe in the sense of we're okay to experiment. It's an okay place for me to try and express myself. And if I flub up, and I will, that I'm not going to be, for lack of a better word, persecuted for that mistake, but use that as an opportunity for real learning. I have to enter that space with the humility to recognize that I may say something that could hurt, harm, or offend. And I need to be willing to own that if I do. But I do think the hope is in the creation of these spaces wherever they might exist, and culturally some of those spaces it's harder to find those spaces.
Yeah, it is.
Very hard to find those spaces.
I love that. A safe space has to be a space where you can disagree. But also to be able to express yourself too. There's I don't know what her official kind of role or title might be, but she's like a leadership educator. Her name's Margaret Wheatley. Have you heard of her before? I have.
So Margaret Wheatley, I don't know if it's her most recent book, but it is the last one that I read, called Who Do We Choose to Be? She wrote that book. And in essence, I appreciate how she writes because it's all a bunch, essentially, of essays. But the real thrust of that book is, if you want to make big change, you got to stop thinking big and tend to the space essentially right in front of you. And that's a choice that we have to make. It will only be intending this space that we're in that the bigger space will eventually be transformed. And I think that comes back to the deeper question of how do we support those around us? How do we build supportive communities in the town of Franklin, in church, in a college setting, et cetera?
I love that. We certainly are always trying to, at the college, build that safe space. Complicated spaces, they certainly are. I think far more complicated than we think about. I also hope that, as you mentioned, we can spread it out and we engage it more. And in part, a lot of what we've been trying to work on is how the campus is not defined by the gates, and that the space extends, and also it comes in to where we are as well. And I hope that we will be able to, with so many of our students and so many Franklin residents, to have these really contemporary and hard conversations.
I think that I appreciate what you're doing in that sense, right? Because there's a real danger in when you create these spaces to say, that's right, I'm going to put that fence back up so no one else, it's good with the people who are here.
Ours. That's right, it's us.
But allow the space to be permeable.
Mm-hmm.
And the realization, I think, that people can cross into that space in many different ways. So maybe you have to take down the privacy fence first, just so people can see in before they cross physically in. But I very much appreciate that work.
Yeah, it's important, especially now.
Yeah.
And I say now, important now in the country, in the world. There's a lot of, well, let's talk about it. I mean, Massachusetts kind of puts up this fence and looks at the rest of the world. You know, we kind of think of ourselves as our own place. We gall each other by saying, no, you can send your refugees from other states here, especially states like Florida and Texas. And we've got this sort of haughtiness about us, about spaces we think we've created here. I mean, what's your thought?
I'm a Hoosier, so
and you're one of those backwards people, right? The way
I'm from one of those flyovers.
The way they tell it, right? It's. I mean, we've gotten to that point where it's. I hear people, I watch the news and I hear people, they will invoke God and say, thank God I live in Massachusetts for a lot of reasons.
Sure.
Mostly political is really what it's about.
Yeah.
But there's that real fear of invaders to Massachusetts as well. Outside people, where you're from. And on some levels we act the way everybody acts on these sorts of things, but we think we're special.
And highly educated, therefore.
And highly educated.
With that comes a sense of moral certitude. And we kind of get back to where I think some amount of humility on all of our parts is helpful. I think.
But that hard part is, we educated people don't want to share space with people we think are going to annihilate us, or we perceive as they want to.
Sure.
Take our things, make us live in a different world. We're afraid of that, and we think that they do want to do harm for us. That they can't come in our safe space because they're not safe. Or
maybe they can't contribute enough.
Most certainly, right?
So, we'll bring you in, but as long as you have this level of education, you can have this amount of wealth, support the system that is. I love math. I mean, I love this. I love Franklin. I love living in Massachusetts.
Me too.
And I can't, I gotta say it on television and YouTube where it's gonna come back and live forever. I really don't see myself ever moving back to where I grew up.
Right.
This has become very much home for me. But I do think all the things we've talked about, this idea of building these spaces that can be inclusive of all, is the real challenge of Massachusetts. It's the challenge of Indiana.
Yeah,
it's the challenge of every space. What does concern me about our area in general is some of the, as diverse as it is, there is still very much a lot of homogeneity in particular, with certain religious backgrounds, political backgrounds, even economic backgrounds.
Sure.
And so, for instance, in our community here in the town of Franklin, it's can't imagine living anywhere else. Quite frankly, I want to raise my kids here and live here the rest of my life. But the fact of the matter is, it's not incredibly diverse in terms of ethnic, racial diversity, economic diversity, even really arguably educational diversity.
Right.
Pretty educated community,
Yep.
pretty wealthy community, and an overwhelmingly Caucasian community.
Right.
And so I think, in our community, how do you provide the space so the space can be a welcoming space for all, and not fall into that trap of, well, you can come be a part here so long as you can buy a $900,000 home, and you look a certain way, believe a certain way, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, and I think that's where the college comes in. I'm going to go out on a limb and say the diversity of Franklin is at the college. And, about a third of our students are people of color.
Yeah.
We have a sizable population that's poor or middle class or lower middle class, and adjacent to that. And I do think that there is so much more we can do when all of these students see themselves as residents of Franklin, because they are, by and large.
Yep.
And when all residents of Franklin see themselves as a part of the college. Therein lies the diversity. We can do things that might be a little tougher to do without it. And I think that's an important piece to it. And hopefully send people into the world who can talk to those strangers, who could be engaged in those with those folks. It's almost like, to get into the safe space, you've got to be educated. Well, not educated, prepared. You've got to prepare yourself to come into a safe space.
Absolutely. And to go forth.
And to go forth, right. That's right.
And to go forth.
You got to be prepped for that.
And I think the challenge for the college will be not to just have the college to be the safe space.
Yeah.
But where are the places they can go outside of the college?
Yes, right.
That are safe, but maybe a little less for them to leverage those skills that they've learned.
Yeah.
I fully agree. I think the bulk of the diversity in Franklin lies at the college.
Right.
I will say one of the things I pride myself on in the community of faith that I'm in is that we've attempted or tried to leverage our space to also be a hub for diversity. And so it's in a completely different kind of realm, but nonetheless an important one with a Spanish-speaking preschool, with we have a Mandarin-speaking church from Westboro that uses our facility, and then Meals on Wheels as well. All of that, I think those pockets, making sure that those places and pockets exist in the community are just as important, not just on the college.
No doubt.
Yeah.
I've always, and travel just keeps coming up and coming up. I would love, so one of my goals is to get every one of our students, you come to Dean as a student, you come to Franklin and you're a student here, you have to spend some time away from the campus. And I don't mean 2 weeks, I mean a full-on go immerse yourself in another community, preferably global, but another community somewhere else. And that should be a part of your existence as a student.
Sure.
And I hope that maybe we can think about how we do that with, well, how wonderful it would be if we said to all people upon turning 18, we mail you your passport, right? We mail you your taxes when you're 18. Yeah. We find you. We mail you your registration for the draft slip. Yeah. We should send you your voter registration card and a passport, and I don't know, a check for a couple thousand bucks, and we say you've got X amount of time to use it. Go somewhere.
Yeah.
Go somewhere.
Yeah.
And look at it, sure, for entertainment and fun and everything else, but make sure you talk to some people when you're there. And then
Yeah.
come back, and hopefully in your local community, you can tell everybody about it and what you did and how it was and what you did as a part of it.
There's a philosopher
Changes the
named
world.
Marie Follett,
Uh-huh.
and she says essentially that nothing ever is.
Ah.
Everything is always becoming. And the idea has to do with, I may be something in the moment, but as soon as I have some sort of interaction with you, I've now changed.
Right. Right.
Fundamentally, I am different because I have sat down with Ken Elmore.
Right.
Or I am fundamentally different because I have walked out of the train station in Piccadilly Square, or walked across the Parthenon. Like those interactions are, they fundamentally change us. And I agree. It is part of my story, actually. When I discerned my call into ministry, my pastor at the time told me, he said, Jacob, if you ever think about coming back to Indiana, get out now. And what he meant by that was not flee from where you grew up, but instead get that experience of somewhere else. And I think perhaps in the back of his head, he knew that experience would, what Marie Follett says, fundamentally change me and make me better understand myself. That's what brought me initially to Boston University, where I met my partner, and now we're back in the greater Boston area.
Wow.
Yeah, but I agree. I think that travel and that exposure would do us all really good. And I will say what's fascinating, I can't give any solid statistics, but if I recall right, in particular people in this area and in Massachusetts, a huge number of them have never left the state. More so than what you would assume based on the education and wealth of the people who live here.
Correct. Yeah, absolutely.
So fascinating.
It is fascinating. Well, so much of this is realizing that, and I think about my experience growing up. I grew up in New York City, and I was this very adventuresome person in New York because most of my friends had never gone with it outside of, for me being a city person, we measured everything in blocks. And there were about 16, 20 blocks that was an entire existence in New York City. I was a guy who'd get on the train and go other places. I traveled far to go to school. I'd go into Manhattan. I grew up in Brooklyn. I'd go into Manhattan on Saturdays to go to look around at the museums I heard that were there. So, it was those kinds of things that I think just really did it for me. And I had someone like your pastor who said, Miss Nancy is who she was. She says, you gotta, there's a big world out there. You gotta go and just go look at it. She says, and she was the one who said, just get on the train, go somewhere, make sure you're safe when you get out, and look around. Just look and see how other people live. Other people live very differently, and this is not your entire world. It doesn't have to be unless you want it to be.
Right. So I think the challenge and the question then becomes, it takes a great deal of courage, clearly, to say get on a train or a plane and go somewhere.
That was tough.
But how do you encourage that?
Right.
Even within a smaller context. So how do you say, well, I've lived in Franklin now 5 years.
Right.
I've never driven down that street, whatever that street is. I've never been to that part of town, whatever that part of town is. I've never been in that shop. I've never been in that store. I've never been to that cultural venue. Of how to get people to explore the great riches that are immediate, not really that far away.
Right, that's right.
Because we do all get in our routines. And how do we kind of ignite within people that inquisitiveness and desire to discover something new?
Including our brothers and sisters
Exactly.
undiscovered, but they're there.
Exactly.
Well, you and I had this conversation. I at Dean, I'm constantly running into, or in Franklin, I'm always running into people who will say to me, I grew up right around here. I've never been on the campus. And you know, I get that. And part of it too is, well, have we invited you to the campus? And that's an important piece. And I know you talk about how you put your welcome sign out that says you're welcome here. And that welcome sign is really important. In fact, you spurred me to do something. I don't know if I told you this. We put together a card that lists these major points when big influx of students or their family members, but visitors will come to the campus, and gave people a sense of how many people come in hopes that they say, oh, we got to put our welcome sign out.
Sure.
And here are the dates and all that sort of stuff. We'll be putting it out and welcoming Franklin to the campus and anybody else who's around. And it'd be great to do that too. So thanks for that.
Oh, you're welcome.
But it's that invitation, right? And that we still need to give each other permission for these things.
Sure,
right?
Sure. And not, you know, and not be condescending about it.
Correct.
Well,
correct. Say more about that.
Well, you know, it is not okay, right? You extend the invitation and you go, oh, well, you've lived here for 30 years, why haven't you not? Rather that just open arms of, I'm so glad you're here now. I mean, who cares if you rolled into town this morning or settled here however many years ago? I'm glad you're here now. And I appreciate that you're willing to be in this moment and share this space with me now. That there's a real, not to get too kind of religious mushy, but there's like a sacredness of that, right? You know, I think we need to recognize that and not make people, which again, religion's really good at this, feel bad, you know. But this, you know, I recognize the bravery it takes to stand here. I recognize the gift that you bring to this moment, and I'm glad that we're here together.
I'm going to use more of that for sure. Well, and you say this important point, recognize. We have to recognize that with each other. We've got to recognize that within ourselves, that we need to do these kinds of things and what we have and haven't done. But even better, here's what we've got to do when we invite and meet that person.
Yeah.
I always like to ask people what they're reading or writing or listening to or watching. I'm always looking for a great recommendation.
You're always looking for a great... I have nothing related to my field, just the simple pleasure of the things I'm enjoying in the moment. And for anyone who's known me any length of time, people generally know I love Star Trek.
Is that right?
I am a Trekkie. I'm not
like old Star Trek?
I'm not a convention Trekkie, but I like Star Trek. I've watched all the series.
Like old
William
Shatner Star Trek?
Well, I like the newer stuff too, and I've been really enjoying the new Star Trek series.
And what's it called?
The new series is called Strange New Worlds.
Okay.
And it is an homage to the old Star Trek. And so it's kind of genre bending in terms of drama and comedy, and there was even a musical theater episode this time.
I have to see this.
But one of the things I appreciate about Star Trek in general is the immense optimism for humanity.
Yeah. Wow.
And the fearlessness in tackling some hard topics. And so there was a absolutely beautiful episode from this past season about the effects of war and what people bring back from war and how they are forced to deal with it and what transformations happen, both for those who participated in it and carry that burden with them, but also the perpetrators of war and what grace do we give them or not give them. It was a powerful episode. So there's that.
Wow.
I'm also looking for pure enjoyment.
Yeah.
Actually, this happened as of the recording of this, because I don't know when it airs, but as of today, the new season of Only Murders in the Building dropped on Hulu last night.
This morning, it's the 2 episodes start. I watched them both.
Oh, don't tell me yet.
All I'm going to say is more great writing. It is, what a show.
My spouse and I love watching that together. So we were excited to see that happen. The reading I'm reading right now, it's another science fiction. I'm reading the Expanse series.
Okay.
And it deals with the idea of humanity's kind of spread out across the solar system. So there's people on Earth, there's people who've only grown up on the moon and only grown up on Mars and only grown up in space, and this kind of the politics of that. How do these, they're all human, but they all have these different backgrounds, and how do they come together? And
did they make a TV series?
They did make a TV series out of that.
So.
Yeah, I'm on the 4th book, I think it is right now. So I think a 7-book series, but
big books.
Big books.
This is worlds. We're talking worlds.
Yeah, and it takes a lot. I'm a slow reader, so it takes me a while to get through. Those are the things that I'm reading right now. They are not immensely technical or profound in the sense of, but they bring joy. And I will say, I think there's something about. I think I'm actually my most creative and my most thoughtful. When I allow that escape. And so, I recommend those without
understand.
Just fully knowing that, one, if you read them, you may think your opinions of me may change a little bit, but they do bring me great joy, and they help me be the person that I am.
Wow, I love that. I do understand. I will confess, I love the Below Deck series and Bravo TV. It's that same kind of thing. And no disrespect to the people in these series, but I'm often writing or thinking or doing something else very creative while it's at cooking, planning. It's on, and it's the kind of show you can kind of sneak a peek or listen to and still do stuff, and occasionally get an idea too.
That's right.
As well. Oh man. Well, I'm also reading Ministry of the Future. It is a really interesting book. It's very big about climate change. Fiction. It's fiction, and it's about a catastrophe. The catastrophe finally starts to happen in portions of the world, and how the world is dealing with an undoubted climate catastrophe and its implications, everything else. Fascinating book. And it's fiction, but it's good.
I have heard of that. It is fiction, but it's a deeply researched, almost...
it feels like you're reading news reports.
Right, yeah, I was going to say, I've heard of that, actually. I think it's on my list. I looked at...
Very good book, but lots. So if you're reading Expanse, and you're willing to put that work into these worlds, this is you were taken into this world that seems very, very, very familiar. Like, aren't we here right now? Or we shouldn't go there if we can help it. So it's a good one.
Yeah.
Well, I have so appreciated this. This has been, you have got me, there's a lot of footnotes to this conversation, and I hope we can find a way to put those in whatever we do. But this has been great. Very, for me personally, very edifying. So thank you.
I appreciate the time. I very much enjoy the conversation and the ability just to sit back and enjoy some conversation. So thank you so much.
Very good. Thank you. And thanks for joining us as well. We hope that you'll join us again back on Main Street.
This program was made possible by your Franklin friends and neighbors, good folks just like you. Thanks for supporting Franklin TV. And thanks for watching.